Welcome to
Candybar, Antlerboy,
a series where I, Mike Rappin, discuss the Netflix original series Sweet Tooth, live on the I Read Comic Books Discord stage with anyone and everyone who wants to chat. Every week we'll be discussing one episode of this brand new series and digging into the comic book of the same name by Jeff Lemire, originally published by Vertigo Comics. Now let's get into the show. Just so you know, this is going to be full spoilers for Sweet Tooth, the series on Netflix, episode 1 at least, and you have been warned. I'm going to bring my friend Danny on here who wants to chat about this series with me as well. Danny, I've got a whole bunch of stuff to talk about here. This first episode, absolutely incredible. I mean, in just the first episode alone, we get through a bunch of major points in the story. The emergence of the sick, the birth of hybrids, Gus's growth with his dad, the introduction of the Grove, Gus leaving home. Like, as someone who just read the first volume of this book, and I'm kicking myself for having not read more because this first episode goes way into some of the lore and the mythos of Sweet Tooth, the series. But, Danny, what did you think of this first episode? Like, I really, really enjoyed it, but I want to hear what you think.
Hey Mike. Yeah, no, I really, really liked it as well. There's a lot. I mean, from the just speaking of the production value of the show, they put a lot of stuff behind this. Like you can tell from the minute this show begins. And also having, like you mentioned, I just read the first volume, so there's definitely some rearranging of the storytelling.
Yeah.
But I liked it because it's building out the world, right? Like beginning with the crumble and what's going on. Now, some of that stuff hit a little close to home, due to in real life.
Dude, I don't even want to don't even get me started on like the fact that there's this virus and everything. I was just like, right. Netflix, you might have released this show at the wrong time.
Yeah, right. But once we get past that and we meet, I think Will Forte is perfect as Gus's dad.
Yeah. Which kind of like brings me into like kind of where I was thinking about going with things. Like, you know, the episode spends a lot of time building up Gus's relationship with his dad, right? Something that is very different than the comic book. And I don't want to necessarily spend this whole series just comparing and contrasting the show with the comic, but it's very at the top of my mind because I just read it, and I thought it was an interesting way to establish the character. Obviously, more Will Forte on screen, the better, as far as I'm concerned. You know, Will Forte is a fantastic actor, and seeing him in this semi-serious role where he's a bit terrifying was really, really interesting. I really liked the way that he had the moments of like going from very loving dad to this very serious, like, don't you fucking leave this forest or else. You know, I really enjoyed that, and I think, you know, having him in this character, or in this at playing this character, was interesting because I think even today people still see Will Forte and they assume that there's going to be this fun kind of goofy guy, and seeing him in more of a serious role was really surprising and interesting. I thought he did a fantastic job. What about you?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think it was important for the show to establish the relationship between both of them, because you have to care about Gus. If you don't care about Gus at the end of the first episode, you're not going to enjoy the show, I don't think.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, his, you know, like all the stuff that Will Forte, I love that he calls him Poobah. Like, it's such a fun thing. Like, okay, because he doesn't know any better, right? There's no one else to like teach him. He learned how to talk just from listening to his dad, and that's like that whole aspect of it, like learning how to be a human just from one individual. I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, I didn't even consider that being like I don't want to say limiting thing to his development by any means, because I think, you know, Will Forte, you know, his character shows him trying to teach his son many things and trying to be, you know, let him explore, let him make mistakes, let him live his life as best as he can. The only downside being that there are no other children, no parents, no anything in his life, just his dad. But I thought that, you know, that was a really interesting thing. And yeah, I never considered the fact that like there was no social side of things. Maybe that's just me being stuck inside for the last year, and I'm just like, yeah, I can survive just talking to one person. You know, it's totally fine.
Yeah. No, and we see that immediately after, you know, unfortunately his dad passes away.
Yeah.
And he makes up friends. He has Dog, who His dad gave him dog,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which, yeah, I think a kid that grew up with no one around, he would just call dog the dog because why would he need to name it something else? There's not like there's other dogs around. He doesn't need to differentiate
Mm-hmm.
between dog and goat and all the other things. Um, but once he throws, I was because I like Gus so much immediately. I was so afraid that anything that would happen to him. Um, like when he starts the fire, I immediately know like, oh, this is gonna come and bite him in the butt.
Right. Right.
You know,
Yeah. I
like all the things that he's not supposed to do, he's doing.
Yeah, I think that's another thing that I wanted to bring up was I really liked all of the actors that they had play Gus. I think like with the exception of Christian Convery, who ends up being like the Gus that we know and is like the main character of the show. I think all of the younger incarnations of Gus were really really cute, and they did a really good job of establishing this like young, innocent, naive kid just trying to live and grow and asking hard questions of his parents. And while they're very much like quote unquote like very child actor in a lot of the moments that they're in, like it's very clear it's just like some kid who is like, all right, you just got to say this line and then we're going to cut, and that's all you need to say today. There was one scene like in the bath particularly, when Gus is being told by his dad like what's out there in the world, and he's the moment before that he says, when am I ever going to be old enough? I'm 7. I thought that was such a striking, powerful moment in the episode. And then his dad tells him this whole story about what's actually happening in the world, which is, him just kind of fibbing to try to keep his son a little bit afraid. But I think that, that kid had a really amazing moment in that scene. Like he was really selling me on this like innocence and this awestruckness that he had just listening to his dad kind of explain these things that he's had questions about for probably a few years. But then, of course, we end up getting Christian Convery, and he's just stupendous. He's the most like adorable kid you've ever seen, and he's such. I think Danny, you and I were talking about this in a book club that we had earlier today, and you mentioned that there was like almost a Disney feel to kind of the way that this kid is designed and dressed, and I 100% agree with that. But I didn't pick it up as I was watching. I just thought like this is a very stylistic character. This character is supposed to be identifiable from a mile away, and I think they totally nailed that. But making it like, is he a Disney character? Definitely is an interesting way to look at that.
Well, I mean, if you look at Lemire's original art and then the translation, like they made a very deliberate choice to not have Gus. Like to Gus, it looks like a pretty much like a normal kid. He just has antlers and the ears,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm.
It's not like he has any other. Because we saw other babies, that were different animals, which
Yeah,
once
yeah.
again adorable, but there was also kind of weird. Like there was an armadillo boy
there
that
was
had
a
to be
there was a kid
on
with
his belly.
with wings instead of arms. Like, all right, I
Yeah.
hope he's okay. Or she.
Like the little dog boy was cute too because
Yeah,
it's a dog, but like as you would grow up with things in your face that are not human, that could seem kind of weird. So they made a deliberate choice to leave Gus as just a boy that has antlers in the ears, and I
yeah.
guess also because some kind of enhanced, like he's a little more enhanced than a regular boy. I don't know. He feels like very agile. He sniffs around,
Well,
so he
yeah,
probably has.
yeah, and I think that that's them. This is something that like as I was watching, I kind of was like, okay, I get it. He's a special, clever little kid. He built all this stuff. He's fixing his dad's old tools and stuff. He's agile. He can fight little snow monsters and stuff like that. He can kick things around. Like he knows he's got combat training. Like it felt like a really half-ass like training montage to be like, don't worry, this kid can take care of himself. Whereas in my mind, when I think of the Sweet Tooth thing, and then again, I want to bring it back to the comic here now, because when I think of Sweet Tooth, and I think of Gus as a character, I think he's helpless. Like he's not doing well on his own. He's able to get by, but that doesn't mean that he's thriving. I think the way that the show portrayed it is that like if Gus had decided to stay in the forest and no one bothered him for another 10 years, he probably would have been fine, which I think is an interesting thing. Obviously Gus's sense of adventure and wanting to leave and wanting to explore is there, and it's apparent from the get-go. But I think that the way that the show made it seem like, oh yeah, this kid would have been fine on his own, is really interesting compared to the comic, where I feel like there was a desperation in Gus's character where he's like, if Jeopard hadn't shown up, we don't know if Gus would have survived another year or two. Especially with the idea of like his dad dies in the comic book and the body just sits there and rots in the house. Like
Oh my god, yeah.
Yikes, you know? Whereas in the
What?
show, they obviously didn't want to make it too disgusting. So, like, he made a, he buried his dad and stuff like that. And this isn't me saying that the show
And
is
he
worse for this. It's
he
just
builds a
different.
dummy dad. He builds a dummy dad too, like to put him on the chair,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. His scarecrow that he has in his house.
which was an interesting reveal because when you see that from behind, and if you read the comic, you're like, oh my god, did the kid just put a dead man on a chair?
Yeah, yeah. Um, but yeah, so I don't know. These deliberate choices that they made to kind of change the story, I don't think that they're bad. I think that they just kind of changed some of the tone. But I like that this, the story still kind of pushes on that idea that Gus wants to get out. He's curious about the world. I feel like in the comic book, it's a sense of desperation. In the show, it's more of a want to explore, a need to find his mother, a need to find some familial connection because and it's not as dark as I'm probably saying it, but he probably just feels terribly alone and needs to find some other connection to his life that make his life make sense. So I'm really interested to see where the story goes because once we get introduced to Jeopard, who doesn't really give a name in this episode that I caught, played by Nanzo Anonzi. I think like I really love that actor that they chose for this. He gives a totally different vibe than the Jeopard from the comic, but I absolutely love it.
So
I'll stop talking
see.
so you can jump in, Denny.
Well, now that you bring that up, and I forgot, I didn't check, but on when we see Doctor Singh's house, there's a football game in the background,
Oh yeah.
and they actually zoom in on Jeopard, and he's so we know he's a football player.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Well, he was, I guess, before everything happened. So I'd be interested to see if the show's going to expand on his journey as well, from him being a football player, because it looks like the show wants to show us more about the crumble and how society kind of fell apart,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to where at least what I've read from the comic is just very focused on Gus and his story going forward.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think hopefully they do that because I would like to see a little bit of difference, especially now that I've read some of the comic. I want some surprises still in an adaptation. I think that'd
Sure.
be neat. But also talking about the doctor, like he was really good too. The actor that played him and like just everything that happened with him and his wife, and then getting to that reveal at the end with the babies, like all that stuff was it was a lot of fun to like go through all that stuff. And I say fun like it was enjoying watching the TV show, not that it wasn't super sad because it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
right. But yeah, no, you're right. I like the character of Jeopardy too here. So we'll see where that goes from this episode.
Yeah, I mean this is the thing where I'm like torn, right? I'm of the opinion that like I guess let me add some comments about Jeopard because I thought that the way that he was portrayed in this book, it feels almost 1-to-1 with the comic, which is great. But at the same time, very distinct. He seems incredibly, to me, him just showing up on screen, his voice, the way he carried himself, the way he responded to Gus, he was immediately likable in like he's kind of a jerk, but in like a loving way. Like, when he's ranting, he's kind of talking like, you're going to have to rotate these crops, make sure you put this thing out to scare away these crows. He's definitely doesn't, and he says it, he's like, I'm an asshole, but I'm not heartless. And I think having a character say something like that out loud is really, really funny. But also it's the absolute truth of who his character is, and we get that right away. Like, he doesn't necessarily want to hurt Gus. He has some sort of other motive, but he clearly wanted to stop those poachers because they were just going to murder this kid, which is a big problem, I guess, for being a hybrid, which is a whole thing. And having read the comic from before, I know kind of where the story is going, but based off of some of the things that they've changed so far, I'm really curious to know like what Jeopard's end goal is here. Given the way that the first volume goes. But the one other thing I do want to mention as well is this idea, and I mentioned it before, like Gus has this sense of adventure, and obviously he wants to go find his mom, and two, this idea of this grove thing, which is a thing in the comic as well, is out there. And he knows that he's different, he understands that he's a hybrid, but he's never seen other kids before. So I'm curious to know how that all is going to play into things, because I think in the comic, it is a driving factor. Like, hey, we need to get to this grove because you're a hybrid and you need to be somewhere that is safe. Whereas in this this TV show, it doesn't seem like Gus necessarily thinks that he's all that different. He just knows that he's different, but he doesn't. I don't think he realizes that there are other kids like him. I don't remember if his dad said that to him or not, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm also very interested in seeing how that interaction plays out when he meets other humans, because he's always been, he's only met a few, and the ones that he's met, they try to kill him,
Right.
and then he found one good one so far.
Right. And even then, he's not really that good, and he shot him
Yeah.
in the head a couple times with the slingshot. So
Right, which I love. Like, he just puts up with it. Like,
yeah.
but that whole thing, that whole sequence of him running to catch up, and he's got these amazing tracking skills. Like, oh yeah, there's the footprints. I know where he's going.
Yeah, he was definitely rolling. He rolled a natural 20 on his survival check in D&D, and
Right.
he's all good. Yeah, I guess before we get to the end of the episode, I guess, I do want to talk about, you brought this up for a moment, the before time scene where we basically see society crumbling. Did they call it the crumble, or is that just what you're calling it?
I think I'm trying to remember. No, I think they call it the crumble.
Okay,
Like the
okay.
news reporter.
Because I really
Somebody.
like that. I really like that. That's all.
I got the crumble from somewhere.
Okay, okay.
I don't know.
Well,
Maybe,
if you want to take
I didn't
ownership,
read a
if it's
review.
yours, you can take that. It's totally fine.
Crumble TM. Yep.
But yeah, I did really like the gut wrenching moments that we got. I like the ramp up, the expansion of the sick becoming a whole thing. Like, again, kind of panic inducing, but at the same time, like,
Right.
this chaos is happening, and then suddenly this very strange other thing happens at the same time. I like that the show tries to establish a timeline of, like, did the sick happen and then these hybrids? Did the hybrids happen and then the sick? Clearly, they don't seem to be related to each other, at least from what we've seen in the show.
Yeah.
But I like that they
hit
showed
on
them at
that
the
a
same
lot.
time. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
They hit on that question a lot. They bring it up a couple times throughout the episode. At least the narrator does, which I like the narration. But that was not subtle at all, where they asked that question multiple times, like, what came first, the hybrids or the sick? Like, did one lead to the other or whatever? So I think that's going to be a big part of the show.
Oh yeah, And if I remember, it's a very, very big part of the comic too. And again, so, like, I think that is maybe we'll talk about the comic stuff. I guess to wrap up the full TV discussion here. The thing that I really liked about that last bit of Gus running towards trying to track down Jeopard was all of the folky music that they had. Like, this whole episode, like, especially
yes.
the last half, is just full of American pop folk music, like that Little Lion Man song, Mumford and Sons, that band. Like, I love that shit. I think it's really catchy. There are days where I'll just jam out to that kind of music. I thought it was totally perfect for the show. So I definitely love the vibe that they're trying to give off with that. What was your take on that, Danny?
No, I love the music as well, especially that song at the end. Yeah, that you mentioned. Now that you mention it, like, coming back to that, like, it lifted my spirit, because everything, like I said, having just read the first volume of the comic, and the tone feels a little different. I wonder if I'm gonna put some folk music like that when I'm reading the comic, see if it helps. But yeah, I really enjoyed that last sequence. Like I said, there's so much. This show looks so good. I think this is one of my favorite pilots that I've watched in recent years.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would go that far. I thought it was a very good first episode. I feel like I've seen more engaging pilots. The thing about this episode that really shocked me was I was skimming through it earlier today just in preparation for today, and the thing that really got me was how much time we get with Will Forte as the dad, and how much time it is just Gus alone before the end of the episode. I didn't realize it was almost like a 60-40 split. Like, the first 40% is just with his dad, and then his dad passes away, and there's, like, the last 60% of the show that is just Gus on his own. I for some reason felt like, oh, Gus and his dad, that's 70% of the episode, and then they rush to the end. And it's absolutely not the case. So I was really impressed by the pacing of this episode, making it taking an hours long episode and actually finding the correct or using the time in a really, really like I guess effective way to establish this the scenes with Will Forte as his dad, and then the scenes where he's alone and he's kind of living his life and being super smart, building his own little gadgets and stuff like that, and farming and taking care of himself. It allowed us to truly grow with the character as he goes from a baby to this 9-year-old, and then living as a 9-year-old on his own for a little while. The only thing that I would argue was not clear was there was a little bit of a time discrepancy. Where, and this is me just nitpicking, but he sets all of the stuff on fire. He sets his dog on fire and he goes, "Oh no, I don't want to do that." And then that is the same day as when the hunters show up. For some reason, I didn't realize that was all in the same day. I thought that there was like a sleeping sequence and then the hunter showed up the next day or something. But the way that Jeopard shows up and says, "Hey, this is, you can't have fires like that during the day." I was like, wait, is this all the same day? Like, I was really, really surprised by that. But, that's just a minor gripe. It didn't really change the story for me or make the episode worse.
I'm not a hiker, so I don't know how long it takes to walk 20 miles.
Yeah, okay,
I imagine
okay.
a couple of hours, but yeah. And one thing I don't know that we talked about real quick, like his love of maple syrup. It's really funny because he picks up the little glass bottle and it could look like it's something else in there. We know it's maple syrup, but if you just show a picture, it's like, is this kid drinking? What's happening?
Yeah, this kid's he's going underneath the stairs. He's got his whiskey.
Okay.
He just wants to chill out. He just wants people to leave him alone. It's a totally normal thing to happen. Which
the little traps he set up, like very Home Alone, but not as effective.
Not nearly as effective. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was interesting, yeah. And they did a lot of stuff, with him and the deer, like talking about seeing a deer and a deer showed up and ran away. And I don't know if the idea of that was like playing off of the very obvious, a metaphor of like, this is his innocence and blah, blah, blah. Now his innocence has gone away now that his father is gone and all this stuff. But it seemed kind of random. In some ways, like he runs into the deer earlier. I thought it was a really interesting moment when he's like, "Hey, I thought I saw my mom," and his dad's like, "No, that's not how this is." But when you think about this, Danny, let's take a step back. This is where I'm just going to needle the TV show. He doesn't necessarily know what a deer looks like, and he doesn't know that he looks like a deer unless his dad explained it to him. I don't know. So why would he think that this was his mom?
I'm sure he's seen his reflection in water or something. And they got
whatever, man. None of this makes sense. This whole show is garbage, Danny.
If I'm an inquisitive kid, I would be like, "Oh, well, that has some parts that look like me.
Yeah,
and my dad has some parts that look like me. So I guess that's mom."
Yeah.
The kid doesn't know what mutation is or the X gene, Mike.
Yeah, this is true. Well, yeah, I guess as far as like, I don't know if you had any other final thoughts about the show. I kind of wanted to talk about the comic for a minute if you want to dig in with me here.
Yeah, no, I think the only thing about the show, like, I'm gonna take my time with it. I'm gonna do like maybe one episode a day or something like that. I really don't want to binge it because I want to just have some time to enjoy in between episodes. I also feel like this could get very sad very quickly.
Oh yeah.
And I definitely don't want to binge sad shows. But listen, that's about it.
You got to get all the sadness out at once. That way you don't have to worry about it anymore. No, it's interesting. Yeah, I think like I'm definitely not going to binge it. I want to try to take this very slowly, because I want to do this. Go through each episode of the show, and I'm curious to know what folks out there thought about the episode. If they wanted to, send us their thoughts. If there's something that we didn't talk about that you wish that we did. The other thing I do want to bring up is, so we read the first volume for a book club that we're both in, Danny, and I'm curious to know like what your thoughts were in terms of the pacing of this. And I mean, like, we know what happened in the first volume, so we're going to kind of spoil some of the stuff that happens in the first volume of Sweet Tooth if you haven't read it already. What were your thoughts on just like how things were paced out? Because I thought it was very slow, but if it had gone faster, I would have been upset,
Oh, so that's funny because I think the first volume was it was paced very fast. Like I read it in maybe 30 to 45 minutes tops.
Oh,
and
sure.
That was 5 issues. It was 5 issues of a comic, and I don't know if it's just the digital guided view that was just allowing me to go through each page and just like not want to stop swiping. And also, I guess I'm not Lemire's style is not my preferred art style on a
Mm-hmm.
book,
Mm-hmm.
so I don't really sit there looking at the art for like I would with maybe some other books.
Sure.
So that probably contributed to me going through it so fast. But it fits the book very well. So I mean, it makes sense that like Lemire did all of this himself. Um, yeah, but I enjoyed the book too. I did mention when we were doing book club, I kind of wish I hadn't read it because I'd like to go into the show not knowing anything
Gotcha.
and then go back and read. Normally, that's what I do with adaptations. I'll watch the adaptation first and then go back to read the source material
Hmm.
because there's that whole thing of like, well, the source material is better. All right, Harry Potter kids, we get it. But like,
Well,
um,
that's interesting because I actually feel the exact opposite about this book. I feel like, given the way that the story has already started to diverge from the comic, I kind of want to know those differences up front. Like Jeff Lemire's book, and for those listening that maybe aren't familiar, Jeff Lemire did this book back in 2009. He had two other folks working with him on it. He did all of the writing and the pencils and inks. Jose Villarrubia did the colors, and the letters were by Pat Brossow, excuse me. And this book is it's really dark. It's really fast. I mean, I think to your point about Lemire's art style, there's not a lot of crazy detail in his art. He's not hiding things. He's not dropping Easter eggs. What you're seeing on the page is what is intended. There's no secret hidden meaning or anything like that.
unless he's going for a nightmare, then he really goes for it.
That's true. That's true. And yeah, that's another thing about the comic that I thought was interesting is that we saw this a little bit in the show in the bathtub scene where this kid is kind of daydreaming as his dad is telling the story about what happened in the outside world, which is his dad's old version to scare Gus into staying. But we see him kind of visualizing a lot of things that are happening, which to me was a nod to the dream sequences that happen in the comic. The comic has like multiple pages of Gus having these pretty horrific dreams
Mhm.
that or dreams that turn horrific in the end, which I think is really interesting. I'm wondering how much that's going to play into the show because obviously it's kind of a key element to the comic. But again, there is nothing that says this show has to adhere to everything that the comic book does. But I do feel like so far they've done a really good job of like keeping Gus really innocent and really young and really naive, as well as establishing a lot of the same, bullet points that you needed to know to get into the book, or get into the main story. Of course, that with one episode in, who knows how much things are going to change, but I do think that at least for a pilot, for a first episode, they did a fantastic job of keeping to the same like tone and feel and everything that the show or that the comic originally offered. Obviously, things are going in a slightly different direction already, with the way that Jeopard is introduced into the story and his ultimate goals, it seems. But again, we have yet to see really how things are going to play out since we barely get to know Jeopard in this first episode.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the fact that the episode is it's twice as long as it took me to read the comic, it makes it feel like it covered a lot of ground,
Yeah, yeah,
but it didn't really, right? It really only covers maybe issue. It only covers issue one, maybe part of two.
yeah, yeah.
If that, it does give you a little bit more world building that you don't get in the comic. Maybe you get that in the. I'm sure you get that in the future of the series.
Hmm.
Just just knowing Lemire and his storytelling. From other books. I'm sure he'll bring up all that stuff from the sick, and it'll be a thing that we discuss. But um, yeah, I really, like I said, it was really fast. There's a lot of stuff happening that I'm curious about how if that's going to be adapted into the show or if it's going to be left on the cutting room floor, I guess. Um,
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm really excited to see where this show goes. I think I don't necessarily have anything else for this episode. I'm again, I have to resist watching the next episode, but I will definitely try because I do agree with you. There's probably like a pacing that needs to happen for this series. I know some folks, the friends of ours, have watched already like 6 or 7 episodes of the show. I think there's only 8. So we're going to be doing this show. I'm going to be doing this show for 8 episodes long. I want to just jump into one episode every week. But yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything. Danny, I really appreciate you coming on and chatting about the show with me.
no, thanks, Mike. Yeah, I definitely had been looking for somebody to talk to about this, and so I'm glad that we have this space, and especially since having just read the comic,
Hmm.
it makes it a really interesting conversation because we have we have plenty of places to go, not just talking about the show. Which it was a fun conversation on its own because it's, like so far, I think there's a lot to talk about.
Definitely, definitely. I'm really excited to see where things go from here. So, I guess to wrap everything up, thanks for listening. This is the first episode of Candybar Antlerboy. This is just a new series that we're going to be trying out here while this show runs on Netflix. You can always check out the rest of the stuff that we're doing over at I Read Comic Books at ircbpodcast.com or on Twitter and Instagram at ircbpodcast. You can follow me at Mike Rappin. Danny, where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me at Echo Spider on Twitter, and you can listen to my podcast at Next Issue Pod on Twitter, and you can look at all that stuff. We have YouTube videos too and stuff like that, so
Cool
check
beans.
that out.
Cool. Thanks, Danny. And yeah, so we'll be trying to do these episodes like every Thursday night is my goal. I just want to get down, chat about one episode, maybe touch on the comic book and go from there. So hopefully you can join. If you come onto our Discord at ircbpodcast.com/Discord, you can join. You can come onto these episodes. You can chat. We can bring you on just like I brought Danny on today just to go through everything for Sweet Tooth. So thank you so much. This episode was edited by me. There's going to be some fun little music and other things that I haven't yet figured out as we're recording, but I'll make sure that all the credits for everything are in the show notes. So until next time, remember, comics are good, and so are you.